I walk a straight line, shackled and chained. Oh, gruesome Gertie is calling my name. There is no mercy in this penitentiary. Just ask the Hillstring gang, or Angola 3. I'm here for life, I'm here to die. Inside these walls, inside the wire. And when the wolf cries, I know it's over. Oh, bloody Angola. Oh, bloody Angola.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to Bloody Angola, a podcast 142 years in the making, the complete story of America's bloodiest prison. I'm Jim Chapman, and today I am continuing with another episode from the Hybristophilia series. And the subject of today's episode is Joyce Mitchell, a Department of Corrections employee who in 2015 was convicted of providing material support to Clinton Correctional Facility prisoners, Richard Matt and David Sweat, in the way of hacksaw blades, chisels, and other tools during their escape of prison, and you will not believe how she got that contraband in there, which I will cover later on in the story. So let's get into it, and I'll give you a little background on Joyce Mitchell, who, by the way, went by Tilly. She was 51 years old when everything I'm about to tell you went down. She was married. She was a mother to 3 children. She was on her second marriage, and according to her first husband, she was a serial cheater. Now, her first husband worked in a stitching factory with her that was located inside of Clinton Correctional Facility in New York, and they didn't work directly for the prison. They were kind of contracted by the prison. So according to him, she started having an affair with another worker in that factory. His name was Lyle Mitchell. Her first husband, he finds out about it because Lyle's girlfriend had caught the two having sex, and she told Tilly's first husband about it. And it wasn't long before they divorced, and eventually she ended up marrying Lyle Mitchell. So on June 6th of 2015, 2 inmates, Richard Matt and David Sweat, they escaped from Clinton Correctional Facility, and they remained on the run for nearly a month. Now, how did they manage to escape? One of the toughest prisons in the United States. That in and of itself is pretty shocking. That's what we're going to talk about today. And we're going to start off telling you about Richard Matt, whose prison nickname was, conveniently, Hacksaw. So he was known as Rick on the outside. He was born in 1966, and he was raised in a suburb of Buffalo, New York. He had a daughter, but he abandoned her when she was still an infant, and at that time, they didn't have any relationship. Now, in 1986, while serving a 1-year sentence for assault, Matt climbed a fence and escaped Erie County Correctional Center. He was on the lam for about 4 days. He actually hopped a train, made his way to his brother's house, and was eventually apprehended. Then, in 1991, Matt convinced a fellow prisoner by the name of David Tesler to pay $15,000 bail to get him released while awaiting trial on a rape charge. Now, the way he talked this guy into paying that $15,000 was, Upon his bail, he said he would kill the witnesses in Tesler's trial. Those witnesses included Tesler's then wife and her parents. So Tesler, he bails Rick Matt out of jail, and rather than doing what he said he would do, Rick Matt actually goes to Tesler's wife, who incidentally was the grandfather of the founder of Warner Brothers Studio and heiress to an enormous fortune, and he tells her about the plan, the murder for hire plan that he had with that prisoner. The two of them then go to the police, and he said in exchange for that information, he wanted a reduction in his prison sentence, which he actually got. So in 1995, he goes up for parole, and he said, quote, "When I got out, I told his wife, look, this guy bailed me out of jail, and he has a hit out on you," unquote. So he gets parole, but a piece of shit like this, you know he can't stay on the straight and narrow for long. In 1997, Rick Matt and an accomplice named Lee Bates, they kidnap a 76-year-old man by the name of William Rickerson, who was Matt's former boss. Now, Matt believed that Rickerson had a large sum of money hidden, and at gunpoint, he demanded to know where that money was. And this is a 76-year-old man, y'all. The two ended up driving this 76-year-old man to Ohio and back. It was a total of 27 hours. And the whole time they had this 76-year-old in the trunk of the car. They would even stop periodically, several times, back and forth on this trip, just to open the trunk and beat the shit out of this guy. So Matt eventually kills the man by breaking his neck before dismembering him with a hacksaw and throwing his body parts into the Niagara River. That's how he got the nickname in prison, Hacksaw. The entire robbery netted less than $100 cash, a wedding ring, and some credit cards. That's it. And it was at this point that Matt committed this crime that he flees and he goes to Mexico. And it's when he's in Mexico on February 20th of 1998 that Rick Matt isn't done killing people. He kills a second man in the border town of Matamoros. The man, known as Charles Perrault, was an engineer working in that area, and Matt attempted to rob him. He follows him to a bathroom. He pulls a knife on him, but he couldn't resist, ends up stabbing this guy to death in the restroom of a local bar, and he was soon arrested, and he was sentenced to 23 years in a Mexican prison for that murder. Now, even being in a Mexican prison did not stop Matt from trying to escape, and he nearly accomplishes that when he climbs the roof of the prison in Mexico before being shot by guards. Now, he wasn't shot one time or even 6 times. He was shot 9 times. However, he would still survive. And in 2007, he found his way back into the United States to face trial for the murder of that 76-year-old I told you about, William Rickerson. His accomplice for that murder ended up testifying against him, and Rick Matt received a sentence of 25 to life for second-degree murder with no chance of parole until 2032. Now, the interesting thing about all of this is that when he was released from that Mexican prison and extradited to the United States, it wasn't because the United States asked for Matt. It was because he was such a difficult prisoner that the Mexican government was extraditing a drug kingpin to the United States who had some charges, and they kind of threw Rick Matt on that same plane because he had been such a difficult prisoner to control. That tells you how bad this guy is. The Mexican prisons didn't want him. So he shows up in the United States, and U.S. authorities, they hold that trial. And during that trial for the Rickerson murder, authorities suspected he was hatching a plan to escape from the Niagara County Jail, where he was being held. He had, at this point, a major escape reputation. So in order to avoid this, they started making him wear a stun belt, and snipers were actually posted outside the courtroom at all times to prevent an escape should he try to do so. A former police officer actually said of Matt during that time that he is, quote, the most vicious, evil person I've ever come across in my 38 years as a police officer. So he gets convicted, as I told you, and it's off to Clinton Correctional Center for Rick Matt. Now, he's one of the two escapees that you're going to learn about today. The other one was a guy by the name of David Sweat. And David Sweat was born in 1980 and raised in New York by a single mother named Pamela, and he also had two sisters. And Sweat had a troubled childhood. As a matter of fact, he was so bad that by the time he was a teenager, his mother sent him to Florida to be raised by his uncle. However, he couldn't even act right then, and stole and wrecked his aunt's car, which gave him a one-way ticket into teenage foster care. Now, by the time he was in his late teens, Sweat was homeless and he began selling drugs. And much like Rick Matt, he was in and out of prison often in the 90s. And it was 2002 that he would make a mistake that would land him in prison for the rest of his life. In the early morning hours of July 4th of 2002, Sweat and two accomplices burglarized a fireworks store in Pennsylvania. And upon returning to New York, they were spotted by a sheriff's deputy who had noticed them transporting fireworks from one car to another, and he attempted to intervene and see what was going on. Immediately upon seeing that sheriff's deputy, Sweat opened fire, shooting the officer 15 times before running over him with a car. Now, this officer miraculously at this point was still alive, and one of the accomplices with Matt shoots him 2 more times in the face, killing him. A few days later, the 3 men involved were arrested, so during the trial, Sweat and one of the accomplices, they plead guilty to first-degree murder, and they receive life without parole, and they did this to avoid the death penalty. The third accomplice, he cooperated with authorities, he cut some kind of deal, and he was only sentenced to 5 years in prison for his role in that murder. And it's off to Clinton Correctional Facility for Sweat to serve the rest of his life. And let me tell you a little bit about Clinton Correctional. It was built in 1845. It occupies just over 1 square mile in New York, and it has a white perimeter wall that scans the entire length and width of the prison, and that wall is topped with a ton of guard towers. The facility is actually named Little Siberia because it stays cold below freezing actually 155 days per year on average. The prison also houses mostly inmates that have been convicted of very serious violent felonies. That makes up about 90% of the 3,000 inmates. And Clinton Correctional has about 1,000 guards. So a guard for every 3 inmates, which isn't too bad in the prison world. So with what is seemingly a secure prison by all accounts, how do 2 lifers not only manage to escape, but also manage to escape with assistance? Let's get into it. So in April of 2015, Rick Matt and Joyce Mitchell were alone together in the tailor shop. And Rick Matt grabs Joyce and kisses her for the first time. Now, Mitchell says, quote, "It startled me. He kissed me with an open mouth. I didn't say anything because I was scared for my husband, who also works at the facility," unquote. In May of 2015, Rick Matt asked Mitchell to perform oral sex on him, and she did so, in her words, out of fear. On 2 or 3 other occasions, Rick Matt would come to her desk wearing a large coat in which he had cut a hole in it so that Mitchell could fondle him. Now, it was during this time she was also having a sexual relationship with Sweat. And Mitchell said she took photos of her breast and her genitals and gave them to both Rick, Matt, and Sweat. This goes on for a while, and she's in a love triangle with these two guys, right? And she's got some serious hybristophilia going on by this point. And in June of 2015, actually June 5th, Matt approaches Mitchell and he tells her they plan to escape that night. So what I didn't tell you about was in between these few months that they were having this affair, the three of them, they were hatching an escape plan. Of course, she's getting totally manipulated, right? These guys ain't interested in her. They're just wanting to get the hell out of prison. Look, one of them dismembered somebody. I mean, she knows how to pick them. Now, keep in mind, her husband still works at the prison with her, so she's trying to be slick. But people noticed. They always do, and this situation was no different. Of course, prisoners talk, and they notice, and they're very nosy, and they would ask Sweat, and they would ask Matt about it. They wouldn't admit to it, but the prisoners and even the staff knew something wasn't right. So on June 6th, 2015, two inmates, Richard Matt and David Sweat, they escaped from the Clinton Correctional Facility. Now, they were discovered missing during a 5:17 a.m. bed check. The two inmates had been seen at the 10:30 p.m. count the night before, and they filled their bed with clothes to make it appear as if someone was sleeping in the bed when the guards would make their overnight rounds. So how did they escape? Well, the two prisoners cut a hole in their cell walls, which gained access to the utility areas behind and above their cells. Eventually, they cut holes in a steam pipe, and they used that steam pipe to escape the prison by shimmying down 6 floors of those pipes. Picture them just sliding down these pipes from one catwalk to another catwalk, all the way down to the ground level. There, they were able to find a main steam pipe, and they followed that through some subterranean tunnels. In New York, there's a lot of things underground, and they had a lot of tunnels under that prison. And so they start following it. They have no idea where it leads. They're hoping it leads to the outside of those walls, right? And at one point, they reach a wall, and they were able to pass through after knocking out a few bricks. Now, the next wall they hit was a massive prison wall, which they couldn't knock the bricks out of that thing. So they tried to drill through it. They couldn't do that, so they moved on to a plan B. Now, in the summer, the steam pipes weren't used, and they knew that. So they cut one opening into a 24-inch diameter steel pipe at the base of the wall. Then they cut another opening from inside the pipe on the other side of the wall. And get this, they actually left a yellow sticky note with a Asian smiley face on it wearing a triangle hat, and it said, "Have a nice day." And they stuck that to the pipe. So once they got beyond that wall, they followed the pipe through the public sewer system until they found a manhole that was well beyond the prison. The manhole was locked and chained from the inside. So Sweat and Matt used some tools they had stashed in a guitar case that they brought with them to get past the barrier, and they cut those chains, pushed the manhole aside, and it's just like on Shawshank, right? Freedom for these two. Now, it was not clear how long the escape had been planned, but officials at this time said it appeared to have taken a lot of labor. To power the tools, they actually hot-wired the electrical junction boxes that were in that tunnel and then strung extension cord. It's just crazy they were able to get all this equipment down there, but they were. Governor Andrew Cuomo declared Matt and Sweat, quote, "definitely had help. I don't believe they could have acquired the equipment to do this without the help." And authorities believe Matt used his con man ways to convince some civilian to help him escape. And they already thought that civilian may be Joyce Mitchell. So the prison goes on lockdown. And of course, one of the first things that occurs is employee interviews. And one of the first people that they interview is Joyce Mitchell. Now, at the time they were interviewing Mitchell, they were also going through her trash at her house, and the neighbors saw this and they all knew something was up, and a lot of them were featured on the news at that time. And it was also interesting that police found out when they interviewed her that the same day of the escape, she checked herself into the hospital. And when they looked at the records, it was for a, quote, case of nerves. I bet she was nervous. So they talked to her, and initially it's just a scare tactic. They're trying to figure out if they can get her to confess to anything. That initial conversation didn't go anywhere. On day 2, nothing really happens. Day 2 of the escape. Then on day 3, June 8th of 2015, Matt's daughter receives a letter in the mail from her father saying that he had, quote, always promised you I would see you from the outside. I'm a man of my word, unquote. And later on, police would find out that months before, Joyce Mitchell contacted Matt's daughter at his urging. And even a couple times after that, she would contact her via text just to update her on her father's medical condition. So on June 9th and 10th, which would be days 4 and 5 of that escape, authorities searched the farms and fields around New York after receiving a tip that Matt and Sweat may have been spotted there. Around 2 a.m., police get a report from a man who said he saw the escapees walking on a highway road, and an officer said, quote, a resident was driving down the road. He sees 2 suspicious residents walking up the road. The second his car lights hit them, they ran off into the woods. The ATF, even the Canadian Royal Mounted Police were called in, that obviously New York being close to the border of Canada. They wanted to alert them. You may have a couple of inmates crossing the border. And the governor of New York comes out with a $50,000 bounty for each inmate. If you give us information as to their capture, you get $50,000. They then increased that to $75,000 when the U.S. Marshals said, hey, we'll kick in another $25,000 per inmate. Then on June 11th of 2015, this is day 6, a Polaroid photo of Matt surfaced wearing a correctional officer's uniform shirt and holding a nightstick. Matt had written on the bottom of the picture, quote, who said I can't escape this place? Unbelievable. Now, the picture itself was taken in 1986 when Matt was imprisoned at Elmira Correctional Facility, and Matt mailed the picture to a retired detective, David Bentley, who knew Matt as a kid. And although the picture was taken in 1986, it was mailed after they escaped this New York prison to that detective. Pretty fucked up. Shows you this guy's mind process, right? Matt wrote to Bentley and said, I know what you did and I'm not going to forget it. So Bentley was the lead detective who got Matt convicted in 2008 for killing and dismembering that former boss of his. And so he's threatening him, right? I'm out now, I've escaped, and I'm coming for you. And it wasn't uncommon for Matt to send Bentley letters. In 2000, he sent him a letter 15 years before the escape when he predicted he would one day get the death penalty. And he wrote, I'm not scared to die anymore. I'm almost going to welcome death. So pretty bold stuff here. And everywhere around this prison was on lockdown. There were no schools going on. The highways were closed until they caught these guys. They didn't feel comfortable with anyone being anywhere outside of their home. And rightfully so. Very dangerous individuals on the run here. So on the 7th day of the search, still no confirmed sightings of the escapees. It's like they disappeared into thin air. This whole time, they've been gathering evidence against Joyce Mitchell since that first discussion. And later that day, Joyce Mitchell gets arrested and she's charged with aiding the escapees. Police had discovered she'd allegedly supplied Matt and Sweat with hacksaw blades, chisels, 2 pairs of special lighted glasses, and screwdriver bits more than a month before the escape, and she gets held on a $100,000 bond. June 13th of 2015, on day 8, 2 men fitting Matt and Sweat's descriptions were seen walking near a rail yard. And look, they've got all the search vehicles out there, helicopters, all-terrain vehicles, search dogs. They can't find these guys. They've only had a couple of sightings. And also during this time, they're applying more and more pressure to Joyce Mitchell to get her to confess. And on June 16th of 2015, the 11th day of the search, Joyce Mitchell confesses to her involvement with the prisoners that escaped that prison. She confirmed she supplied him with hacksaw blades, chisels, and other tools. And according to the district attorney who oversaw the prosecution of Mitchell, he said that she had agreed to be the getaway driver, but backed out because she still loved her husband and felt guilty about participating. He went on to say, basically, when it was go time, it was the actual day of the event, I think she got cold feet and realized, what am I doing? Reality struck. She realized that really the grass wasn't greener on the other side. And it was revealed that Mitchell had discussed having her husband, Lyle, killed in a potential murder for hire deal with Matt. According to Joyce Mitchell's confession, Matt referred to her husband, Lyle, as the, quote, glitch in his plan and planned to kill him after the escape. The DA also went on to say Joyce Mitchell tells us there was a discussion between her and Matt that upon the escape, they were going to return back to Joyce Mitchell's home, at which time Matt and Sweat were going to kill her husband. And police asked her, why did you get tied in with these guys? You got a guy that dismembered somebody. You got another guy that killed a police officer. What's the attraction here? And she just said they showered her with attention and she didn't get attention at home and all those sorts of things, and just kind of fell in love in short order with both of them. So on the 13th day of this manhunt, Matt and Sweat, they get added to the U.S. Marshal Service's 15 most wanted fugitives list. A $25,000 reward gets added to that big reward for information to capture them. A few days later, on the 15th day of the search, the police get a great tip when someone calls in and says 2 men were spotted in a New York county who fit the description of Matt and Sweat. Police said the witness spotted the men along a railroad line that runs along a highway. And so they get canines, they get aviation out there, they start searching, and they come across an old cabin in the woods. And they scrub that sucker down for DNA, and sure enough, they get a match, and they move into the 17th day of the escape. And while all this is going on, they're still looking for these guys. Of course, they're trying to figure out not only how they escaped, but how could that happen in general? Where was the security fallout that allowed these men to escape? They found out, the investigators, that no one was inside the 35-foot high guard towers when the 2 men climbed out of a manhole right outside of that prison, or they would have seen them. They found out the catwalks and the underground tunnels had not been inspected in forever before these men escaped, or they might have caught the fact that those bricks were chipping and falling apart and easy to knock out of the wall. In 19 days into this ordeal, someone named Gene Palmer surfaces. He was also a correction officer, and he was charged with supplying tools hidden in frozen meat to Matt and Sweat before the escape. Palmer also was the one to show them where the catwalk areas were behind their cells, and he had worked for the prison for more than 27 years, and he had known Matt and Sweat for about 5 of those years. And not only did this guy do all that, he showed them how to wire the electrical boxes but he claimed that it was to cook food in their cells, not to escape. So police followed up on that lead, and they approach Mitchell and they say, is what we're thinking true with this guy aiding and abetting? And she confirmed that. And not only was that true, she was the one that actually delivered that frozen meat with the hacksaw blades and all that to Sweat and Matt. So after 21 days on the run, police get another lead, but not in the way you would expect. Someone actually calls and says that he was shot at while he was towing his camper trailer. Police respond and they find a bullet hole from a 20 gauge shotgun in this camper trailer. They're able to trace that back to a 20 gauge shotgun that was stolen from that hunting camp that Matt was hiding out in. So they start searching around the area, and lo and behold, they hear some coughing and they could see some brush moving in some woods. So police go to investigate this coughing, and they come across Richard Matt, who was armed with that 20 gauge shotgun. They raise their guns, drop the weapon. He wouldn't do it. He points the weapon at police, and they shoot and kill Richard Matt. And what about Sweat? Well, 2 days after Richard Matt was killed, a New York state trooper named Jay Cook, he's traveling down the highway, and he passes an individual walking, and that was David Sweat. So Cook circles back, and he's pretty sure that's him, but he's definitely going to question him, make sure it's him. And of course, Sweat sees the officer circle back, and he takes off. He starts running across the hayfield toward a tree line. Now, this state trooper, much to David Sweat's chagrin, is a expert firearms instructor. So he gives chase, and when it became evident that Sweat might escape, he fires 2 rounds from his .45 caliber Glock and hits Sweat twice in the right shoulder and the left arm. And he was about 73 yards away. That's one hell of a shot with a pistol. So Sweat falls to the ground and he's taken under arrest. And he had on him a map. He had insect repellent, Pop-Tarts of all things, and a few other items, some matches, etc. But he didn't have any weapons on him at the time. So he gets transported to the hospital for those gunshot wounds. And it's all over the news that one was killed and the other one was captured. And police, now that one of them is captured alive, they're able to get a detailed kind of plan. He said that the original plan was for Mitchell to pick them up, and they were going to go kill her husband and then drive to Mexico, but Joyce Mitchell backed out at the last minute. So when she failed to pick them up, they didn't have a plan B, so they just started heading north on foot. They knew Canada was north, and they knew that's where they wanted to get to. Now, Sweat said that he and Matt had split up about 5 days prior to Matt getting killed. He said that Matt had blisters all over his feet, and Sweat felt like Matt was slowing him down. So he just basically said, I'm leaving. I'm gone. So we're going to fast forward to July 28th of 2015, and Mitchell appears in court, pleads guilty to what's known as first-degree promoting prison contraband and fourth-degree criminal facilitation. And she's got to await sentencing. And that occurred. That was on September 28th of 2015, and she was sentenced to 2.5 to 7 years in prison and a $6,000 fine, which when you help 2 lifers arrested for murder escape, I think that's way too light of a sentence. Sweat also eventually pleaded guilty, and he really had nothing to lose. He was already in jail for life. So time went on. In February of 2017, Joyce Mitchell gets denied her first bid for early release. And look, at this time, TV shows are everywhere. 48 hours, 2020. There's even an episode of Law and Order covered this case. In 2017, a Lifetime movie came out called New York Prison Break, The Seduction of Joyce Mitchell, to much fanfare. And I mentioned Gene Palmer earlier, and he ended up only getting 6 months in jail for his role in that escape. And on February 6th of 2020, after serving a little over 4 years in prison, Joyce Mitchell gets released. And she has been released for the last 5 years. And another movie, a Showtime miniseries, actually came out just a couple of years prior to her release. It was called Escape at Dannemora, which is the county where all this took place. And Patricia Arquette actually played the role of Joyce Mitchell. And I have a lot of interesting photos, and I'm going to put up on the Patreon for this episode so you can see, put faces with names here. But I'll tell you what, these guys look like bad fucking news. I hope you enjoyed this edition of the Hybristophilia series, Joyce Mitchell. I appreciate you listening. Patreon for commercial-free early releases and more. Patreon.com/Bloody Angola Podcast. And until next time, I'm your host, Jim Chapman, for Bloody Angola, a podcast 142 years in the making, the complete story of America's bloodiest prison. Peace.
I walk a straight line, shackled and chained. Oh, gruesome Gertie is calling my name. There is no mercy in this penitentiary. Just ask the Hillstring gang, Rango